Two facts, and they can't both be true. Your skeleton laid down new bone this morning, inside the hip you were sitting on, and your last scan said there is less of it than 3 years ago. So the crew still turns up. Nobody is handing them the order. That missing order is why a stumble that used to cost a bruise now costs a winter. Bone doesn't take its instructions from calcium. It takes them from bending. What went quiet is the amplifier on that signal, and near the end I'll give you the adjustment, about rest rather than effort, that decides whether the message lands at all. Stay in the chair, because I want a number out of you before we go any further. Sit forward so your back is off the rest. Feet flat, roughly a shoulder width apart. Fold your arms across your chest so your hands can't cheat for you. When I say go, stand all the way up and sit all the way down, as many times as you can, until I say stop. If a knee objects, stop early and keep whatever you got. Go. Keep the arms folded, all the way up, all the way down, no bouncing off the seat. Halfway. Keep going, same speed. And stop. Hold that number. Here's where it sits. Roberta Rikli and Jesse Jones standardized this test in 1990 across more than 7,000 adults, and these are their published ranges for women. 60 to 64, 12 to 17, 65 to 69, 11 to 69, 70 to 74, 10 to 15, 75 to 79, 10 to 15, 80 to 84, 9 to 14. What surprised me was how flat that is. From the low 60s to the low 80s, the expected count falls by about three repetitions across 20 years. Whatever is emptying out a skeleton in that stretch of a woman's life, it is not a steady fade in what she is physically able to do. And the number you're holding isn't a bone measurement. It's a force measurement, how hard and how fast you can shove the floor away from you. Which matters because your bones do not count repetitions. They count something much stranger, and it explains why 30 minutes of walking a day can register inside you as nothing whatsoever. There are somewhere around 42 billion cells buried alive in your skeleton right now. They are called osteocytes, and they make up 9 out of every 10 cells in bone. Each one is sealed in a tiny stone cave called a lacuna, with about 50 hair-thin arms threaded out through tunnels called canaliculi, holding hands with its neighbors. They cannot move. They cannot divide. Some of them have been sitting in the same cave for 25 years, doing one job, reading what is happening to the mineral around them and reporting it. Here is what they are actually reading, and it is not pressure. Bone is not dry chalk. It is a stiff sponge, saturated with fluid, and every tunnel in it is full. Squeeze a wet sponge and the water has to go somewhere. It moves. When your heel hits the floor and your thigh bone bends by a fraction of a millimeter, fluid squirts through those tunnels and drags across the hairs of every osteocyte it passes. The drag is the message, not the weight, the flow. Engineers have a word for a material like that. Poroelastic. It comes from soil mechanics. Saturated clay under the foundations of a building, where the load and the water and the pores have to be solved together. Your femur obeys the same equations as the ground under a tower block. And once you know that, the sponge tells you 3 things I haven't said yet. 1. Standing still is almost silent. Squeeze a sponge and hold it, and after the first moment, nothing flows. A woman standing at a kitchen counter for 40 minutes is delivering one message, then 40 minutes of nothing. 2. Speed is the volume knob. Squeeze slowly and the water seeps. Squeeze fast and it jets. Same load, completely different signal, which is why a slow, careful step and a sharp drop onto your heels are not the same event to a cell that only feels flow. 3. The sponge has to refill. Keep squeezing without letting go, and there is nothing left to move. Remember that one. It is the whole of what I'll ask you to do differently at the end. Harold Frost, an orthopedic surgeon in Michigan, put a name to this system in 1987. He called it the mechanostat, and the comparison he meant was a thermostat. Bone has a set point, and it compares the strain it feels against that set point. Below it, material gets pulled off the walls. Above it, material gets added. The unit here is microstrain, and that word is not medical either. It's borrowed straight off a bridge girder. Walking bends the shaft of your thigh bone by roughly 500 microstrain. That is 0.05 of 1%. Across the whole length of the femur, about 1/5 of a millimeter. The strain that reliably tells bone to add rather than hold sits far higher, somewhere in the region of 1,500, and physiologists still argue about the exact figure and how much it differs at the hip from the spine. So who carries the order? The osteocyte does. Chemically. When it is bored, when nothing is flowing, it releases a protein called sclerostin. And sclerostin is a stop-work notice. It tells the osteoblasts, the cells that lay new mineral down, to sit on their hands, load the bone properly, and sclerostin falls within hours. This is solid enough that there is now a drug built on it, romosozumab, approved in 2019, which does nothing but block sclerostin. Somebody spent a decade and a fortune making a molecule to imitate the effect of being jolted. Which raises the question I would have asked at 40. If the system is that sensitive, why doesn't a 5-kilometer walk light it up like a switchboard? In 1984, in a laboratory in London, Lanyon and Rubin answered that with a turkey. They took the ulna of a wing, isolated it surgically so no muscle pulled on it, and put the two ends in a rig so that they, not the bird, decided every single load that bone would ever feel. Then they varied the diet of loads and measured what the bone did about it. Leave it alone entirely and it emptied out fast. 4 loading cycles a day held the line. 36 cycles a day grew new bone. And then the finding that reorganized the field, 1,800 cycles a day grew no more bone than 36 did. 50 times the work, nothing extra to show for it. The system saturates within seconds, and everything after that is exercise you are doing for your heart and your mood, which are excellent reasons. But your skeleton stopped listening around the 40th step. It is a bird bone in a machine, and I'd hold it loosely for that reason. But the shape of the answer has held up everywhere it's been checked since, and the logic behind it is hard to argue with. Mineral is expensive. Carrying it costs you every time you climb a stair, and maintaining it costs you every day in metabolism. A body that hoarded bone it never used would be a body carrying luggage on a long walk for no reason. So the rule the skeleton evolved is brutal and thrifty. Keep only enough to survive yesterday's biggest jolt, not yesterday's biggest. Now hold that rule against 10 years of a comfortable life, and here is what appears inside a vertebra. Trabecular bone, the honeycomb in the middle of your spine and the top of your thigh bone, is not a solid block. It is a lattice of struts, vertical ones carrying the load and horizontal ones bracing them sideways, exactly like the cross-bracing on a scaffold. When the order to build stops arriving, the removal crew keeps working, and the thin horizontal braces go first, because they are thinnest. Thin a strut and it can be thickened again later. Sever one and it is gone. The cells that lay down mineral need a surface to stand on, and there is no longer a surface there. That gap does not come back. You have seen the result from the outside without being told what it was. The hem of a skirt that used to sit right and now doesn't. The nurse writing down a height you would have sworn was wrong by 2 centimeters. That is not posture. That is a stack of vertebrae quietly losing their cross-bracing and cephling. If that has happened to you, tell me in the comments how much and over how long. I want to see the range. And it brings me to the thing I had backwards for years, which is what estrogen was ever doing in this story. I assumed, like most people, that it was somehow about delivering calcium. It wasn't. Lanyon's group again, this time in Nature in 2003, showed that when you take away the estrogen receptor alpha, the docking point on the bone cell, the bone's response to being loaded collapses. Same load, same fluid, same hairs on the same cells, far less building. Estrogen was never the bricklayer and it was never the brick. It was the gain control on the sensor. Go back to Frost's thermostat and you can feel exactly what happened at 50. The room did not get colder. Somebody walked in and turned the thermostat's target up, and now the same fire reads is not enough. And the heating never comes on. Your daily walk did not shrink. The bar it has to clear moved above it, which is why this is not a story about a weakening body. The sensor is intact, the wiring is intact, the crew is still on the payroll. You are simply speaking at the volume that used to work in a room that now needs more. If that just rearranged something you'd been told for 20 years, subscribe, because there is a harder layer coming about what your scan cannot see, and then the exact way to shout. And that part is where most of the value is. So, 42 billion sensors, sealed in stone, reading fluid. Walking delivers about 500 microstrain. The build threshold sits nearer 1500. 4 cycles a day hold the line. 36 grow bone. 1800 add nothing. Sclerostin is the stop work notice. Estrogen was the amplifier. And it left. Which leaves a question I haven't touched. 2 women get the same T-score off the same machine on the same afternoon. One of them breaks a wrist next winter. and one of them doesn't. Same number, different outcome. The reason for that is the most useful thing in this video, and it is not what the number measures. Stand up for 15 seconds. Fingertips on a chair back or a counter for balance only, not for weight. Rise up onto the balls of your feet, as high as you can. Now let your heels drop and hit the floor. Did you feel that in your teeth? That jolt traveled from your heel through the shin, through the hip, up every vertebra into your jaw, which tells you, better than any diagram, that the whole structure was loaded in about 1/10 of a second. One drop like that puts roughly 3 times your body weight through the top of your femur. For a woman of 70 kilos, that's around 200 kilos, near enough 450 pounds, arriving in a single instant. Now the part that is worse than I've made it sound so far. This loss is not a gentle slope. In the SWAN study, which has followed thousands of women through the menopause transition since 1996, the losses concentrate in a narrow band from about a year before the final period to 2 years after. The spine can shed something close to 2% in a single year inside that window, and then the rate falls again. Let me correct one figure while I'm here, including one that would help my argument if I let it stand. You will hear constantly that women lose 20% of their bone in the 5 years after menopause. That number gets repeated because it's dramatic. The honest version from the cohort data is nearer 10% at the spine across the whole transition, with the fastest single year at around 2. The mechanism is real. The headline was inflated in the retelling, and I'd rather you heard it from me. Here is what your scan cannot see, and the answer to those 2 women. A DEXA machine measures how much mineral sits in a 2-dimensional shadow. It cannot see whether the cross-bracing inside that shadow is connected or perforated. 2 lattices with identical mass, one braced and one not, are not remotely the same structure. And that is why, in the NORA study published in 2004, 82% of postmenopausal women who fractured had T-scores better than -2.5. Better, above the line. Not classified as osteoporotic at all. The number is a useful proxy, not a verdict, and it is quietly the wrong shape for the thing it's measuring. Now I know the objection, because it's the fair one. I walk 5 kilometers most days. I take my calcium. I've done everything I was told, and my last scan was worse than the one before, so what exactly are you asking of me? Nothing about that is unreasonable, and the walking is doing real work for your heart, your blood pressure, and your mood. But walking puts about 1.1 times your body weight, through the hip, in a slow rise and fall, and it is a message your cells have received every single day, since you were 4 years old. Familiar loads get tuned out. The building response to a repeated load fades within about 20 cycles of it. And on calcium, the Women's Health Initiative gave more than 36,000 postmenopausal women calcium and vitamin D for 7 years. Hip density improved by about 1%. Hip fractures across the whole group did not significantly fall. Calcium is the material on the pallet. Nobody had signed the work order. If you're taking alendronate, keep taking it. The 1996 fracture trial cut spinal fractures roughly in half. That's real. But it works by slowing the removal crew, not by ordering new construction. So the ordering is on you, and the way you order is next. And it isn't the exercise everyone repeats. It's the gaps in between it. Here is the version that works, and every detail is load-bearing. Stand tall, fingertips resting on a counter. Rise onto the balls of both feet. Then drop. Don't lower. Let gravity do it. Land through both heels, knees straight but not rigidly locked. Do 10, then stop. 10 is not a beginner's number that you graduate from. 10 is a full dose, because the turkey told us the system saturates. And this is the adjustment. Count 3 seconds between each drop. Not for your knees, for the sponge. The fluid has to seep back into the tunnels before the next squeeze can move it again. And rodent work in the early 2000s found that inserting rest between load cycles restored the response dramatically compared with the same number of cycles run back to back. Nobody knows the perfect rest interval in a human hip. 3 seconds is a sensible reading of the data, not a settled fact. Then leave it 4 hours. Roebling and Turner showed that splitting the same total number of loading cycles into separate bouts hours apart produced far more new bone than doing them all at once. 30 heel drops in one go is 1 conversation. 10, 10, and 10 across a day is 3. Same effort, 3 times the order. 2 more details that people get wrong. Do it barefoot or in a thin sole on a hard floor. Cushioned trainers and thick carpet exist specifically to slow the rate of impact, and the rate is the signal. You would be muffling the only thing you came to say. And if you have had a spinal fracture, a T-score below -3, or a hip replacement, do not do heel drops. Your version is stair descent, taken deliberately and carrying weight. Now the honest limit, because it belongs right here. No trial has ever shown that heel drops prevent hip fractures. What exists is bone density, which is a surrogate. In 2010, premenopausal women doing 50 hops a day on one leg for 6 months gained around 2% at the femoral neck in the hopped leg, and nothing in the other. A 2015 trial ran the same design for 12 months in older men, and the hopping leg gained while the control leg didn't. Clean, elegant, and in men, which I'm not going to pretend away. The best evidence in women like you is LIFTMOR, 2018. 101 postmenopausal women with low bone mass, heavy lifting and impact twice a week for 8 months, spine density up nearly 3%, while the control group went down. Small trials, real numbers. A skeleton that responded at 70 the way the textbook said it only responded at 20. Which is the part I'd hold on to. The lattice in your hip at 78 is not a slower version of the one you have now. It is the same tissue, with the same message. So, the whole thing, in 5 steps. 1. 10 heel drops in the morning. 3 seconds between each, barefoot on a hard floor. 2. 10 more in the afternoon and 10 in the evening, at least 4 hours apart, and never all 30 in one run. 3. Come down the stairs at least 5 times a day on purpose, letting each heel land rather than creeping. 4. Carry your shopping, one bag in one hand, swap hands halfway, and walk it from the car yourself. 5. Give the crew material to work with, around 80 grams of protein a day for a 70-kilo woman, which is 4 palm-sized portions, plus your calcium from food where you can. If step 2 was new to you, the splitting, not the drops. Hit like. That one detail is the difference between doing this for a year and getting nothing, and doing this for a year and getting a scan that moves. Before you go, comment 3 things: your age, the country you're watching from, and your chair stand number from the start. And tell me whether you have ever actually had a DEXA scan, because I suspect half of you have been managed for this without ever being measured for it, and I want to know if I'm right. Then send this to one woman who was told her bones were just doing what bones do. Nothing in your skeleton has quit. It's waiting on you to knock.